Hi, my name's Claire, and it's my pleasure to be here kicking off this series of webinars which Carl Dowse has organised for you at the FOM. Let me start by telling you a little bit about myself. I love chocolate. I live in a national park in Bavaria. I teach business English. I do a number of different things in my work. I teach English, business English, at the Hochschule Neu-Ulm in Bavaria. I also do some teaching in companies, and I also do some writing and editing of materials, mainly for business English learners. And as this is the first webinar, and as we are at, or just about to be at, the start of a new semester, I wanted to focus on the first, what I think anyway, is the first thing that we have to deal with when we're teaching a business English course, and that is the issue of needs, learner needs. Okay, so if you were teaching in a company, perhaps some of you teach in company or have taught in company, sorry. If you were teaching in company, it would be very simple. You would spend the first lesson doing a detailed needs analysis, or perhaps you would do it before the first lesson. You would find out what your learners need and use that to make a course plan. However, when we're teaching in a university, higher education context, it's a little bit more complicated than that, unfortunately, most of the time anyway, at least in my experience. We have different stakeholders involved, and perhaps sometimes what the learners want to do is not something which is going to actually help them. Okay, this can also be true in company, but in Hochschule, in the Hochschule context or university context, it's often about much more than just what the learners want to do. So that's why I wanted to focus on the issue of how to identify needs and how can we balance the different demands which are being made on us as freelance business English teachers. I'm also a freelancer, I should say. Everything I do as a freelancer, so I understand how sometimes we can feel like we're having to juggle a lot of frogs, keep a lot of plates in the air at the same time, whatever metaphor you want to use. We often feel like we're being pulled in a lot of different directions by different stakeholders. Okay. In this photo, you can see the context in which I teach. Or this is a photo from the library of the Hochschule where I teach. I wonder if these students bear any resemblance to the students you teach. They're young-ish, although we do get a range of quite a range of ages, from say 18 straight out of school to later 20s, people who've already been in work and then have decided to study, or maybe study something else. They often like to dress like it's summer, even when it's not, as you can see here. They like Red Bull. They often lack energy and feel like they need energy drinks to help them. And they're quite tied in, so to speak, to their technology. They like their laptops, their mobile phones. And I think this picture also kind of suggests the structured nature of Hochschule teaching. They are there to study, to get a degree, to pass exams, essentially, so that they can move on to the next stage in their lives. Okay. This means that they often don't even really think about their needs as English learners. They're just thinking, I need to pass this exam. I need to get into my next year. Some of them think, I need to get a good level of English so that I'll be allowed to do an internship abroad, which I want to do. So they're very kind of goal-oriented and not very needs-oriented, or not needs-oriented at all. Okay. Who are our stakeholders? The stakeholders I mentioned in my title of the webinar. Who is influencing us when it comes to determining what needs to focus on in our courses? Right. So, of course, we have... Ooh, hang on a second. That's not what I had expected to see. Let me see. Okay, well, let me tell you what is on the slide. Students. Students generally want to pass exams. They want to feel like they're achieving success. They want to fulfill the requirements which are on them. They may feel like they're jumping through hoops, perhaps, to do that. And then we have coordinators. This is at least the term we use where I work. Perhaps you have a different term, but I have worked with the term coordinator, a person who is responsible for the course that I'm teaching. My coordinator is responsible for the syllabus that I teach. He also writes and provides the materials for the course, although we don't have to use them. These materials, we're supposed to use them, but it's not like a must. You absolutely have to use these materials. What is my coordinator interested in? He is interested in how many students pass the exams at the end of the semester, exams or assessments. Some have oral assessments rather than formal exams. He's interested in how is attendance. Basically, he's interested in, is the syllabus working? Are students attending? Are they passing? So he's kind of interested in the processes we're carrying out. He's not so interested in what learners' needs are, to be completely honest. But yeah, I won't say any more about that though. Okay, finally we have the institution, so the Hochschule, the university. The Hochschule or university also want students to pass, and they also want good attendance. Okay, they want their students to go out in the world, be able to get a job. They want good employability. Okay, so up to now, when talking about what the different stakeholders want from us, I've talked a lot about processes. I've used the words exam, attendance, syllabus, those kind of words, because I think that's a fair description of the situation that I experience as a teacher. But one thing I haven't really mentioned is individual needs, learner needs. Okay, but it's my belief that we can only keep all of these stakeholders happy ultimately if we do focus on individual learner needs, right? The more we focus on individual learner needs, the better students are likely to do in their exams, the more often they're likely to attend our lessons. Okay, so I think learner needs are key. Okay, but given what I've just said, it's also clear that learner needs aren't always our focus. So what I want to do get you to think about a little bit is how can we tune in to those individual learner needs given this context that we're experiencing. Okay. So here we are, tuning into learner needs. Oh, my beautiful diagram isn't, my beautiful diagram in PowerPoint isn't showing up for you here in the Adobe room. This can be one of the perils of using technology. It doesn't always go the way you had planned, but it's okay. What I had on this flow chart was 3 steps. The first one was production, the second was patterns, and the third was pathways. Okay, so I have to admit I chose, I definitely wanted to have the word production, and I definitely wanted to have the word patterns, and I thought it may be nice to have a PPP model, not the typical present, practice, produce, but a little bit of a different PPP model, production, patterns, and pathways. Okay, so this may sound like a little bit of jargon that I've just invented, so apologies, apologies for that. But let's unpack it a little bit. Production. Let me see. In order to know what learners' needs are, they need to produce language. Okay, it sounds so obvious, but I think it's also quite easy to forget. If we have learners sitting there in rows speaking silently, how are we gonna, sitting silently, how are we gonna know what they need? We need to give them right from the start varied opportunities for production. Why varied? Well, it could be that learners are familiar with one style of speaking. Maybe at school, learning English at school, they have given a lot of presentations. They feel like they can kind of bluff their way through a presentation. But perhaps they are really lacking in confidence when it comes to kind of interactional production activities. Maybe they can't actually interact with another speaker, although this is an important skill, of course. So I think it's important to give learners a lot of opportunities for practice and ensure that these are varied. Okay. You can then use what is produced, the language which is produced, as a kind of raw material which you can work with to identify patterns. Bringing on to my second P, patterns, which I'll come to in a moment. You have to listen to them when they're producing language, or of course read carefully if that production is in writing. It doesn't have to be speaking. And you have to kind of sift through what things are impeding communication here, what things that the student is doing, what things which the student is doing are going to make it harder for them to achieve the learning goals set for them by the institution. Okay. If you're not doing it already, make lots of notes on paper or electronically. If you don't like making notes, and if your students are okay with this, perhaps you could record them speaking, maybe using an app on your phone or whatever you have. If you're not happy with, if you dislike making notes for whatever reason, why not record them? Okay, but listen, record, analyze what you hear, read from these varied opportunities and contexts. Secondly, don't assume, discuss. by which I mean, I think we as university business English teachers have a tendency, unfortunately, and I know I'm also guilty here, of just assuming that we know what learners need, especially if we've been teaching for a long time. Okay, it's easy to think that you can second guess what learners need. Maybe you've been teaching for 10 years, and every year for the last 10 years, your learners have needed X or Y. But that doesn't necessarily automatically mean that the learners you get this semester will also need X and Y. Okay, they may well do, but they may also not. So I think it's important to not assume that you know what learners need. To discuss it with them, okay, in as far as you can. If you're going to discuss it with them, you have to make sure they feel comfortable discussing their needs with you. You have to make sure you give them a lot of options to choose from. Okay, you could say there's also the assumption you're predetermining what these options are, but to try to avoid that bias, give them as many opportunities as possible. Okay, give them options, make them feel comfortable, discuss what their needs are with them. You may well be surprised by what they tell you. Okay. And thirdly, linking on to what I just said, keep an open mind. Okay, maybe all of your learners up to now have struggled with past simple versus present perfect. But then perhaps you get learners whose grammar is great. They just don't have the confidence to stand up in front of a group of their peers and give a presentation. Okay, so make sure learners have opportunities to produce language from the very beginning of your course. Make use of those opportunities to record and analyze their language. Don't assume that you know what they need before you've asked them. Ask them while keeping an open mind. Okay. Okay, then this brings us on to patterns. Just discussing with the learners what they need and giving them opportunities for production is, of course, not enough to successfully identify and meet their needs. Okay. You need to focus on recurring issues. Okay. For example, yesterday I had my first lesson with a group, an in-company group, in fact, and I got them talking. I noticed a recurring issue was problems with prepositions. It's not the most important, well, you may disagree. In my opinion, prepositions are not the most important issue ever when it comes to communicating effectively in English. But I was able to see that this was an issue. This was the only issue that all of them were having problems with. I was looking out for that pattern. I was looking out for a pattern. That was the pattern that I found. Okay, or one of them. Okay, so I identified a pattern was problems with prepositions. Another pattern that I identified was inability to use the present perfect correctly, wanting to use the present simple when they should have been using the present perfect. Another issue was a lack of confidence, a lot of hesitation, a bit of a lack of verbal fluency. Okay, so prepositions, that was everyone had that issue. Present perfect, that was probably about 70%. And fluency, hesitation, that's probably also about 70%. So when I'm teaching a group, especially if I'm teaching a larger group, I need to focus on what are the recurring issues first. what does everyone seem to be having a problem with? Or if not everyone, say the majority. Okay. With my university students who have to write essays, I get them producing by practicing essays, and then I look for patterns in their written work. And I, as often as I can, every week if possible, I collate those patterns into a document, examples of mistakes which they've made, which typify those patterns, and I distribute that to them, and we look at it together. Okay, so it's kind of personalized feedback through global patterns, if you like. Okay, so focus on recurring issues. Don't focus on a problem that one student had once. Okay. Peer and self-evaluation. Okay, so what I've just mentioned is an example of teacher feedback, of course. I was focusing on teacher feedback. But, as I also mentioned, we're often dealing with larger classes. I'm not sure exactly how large your classes are. Mine are typically 25 to 30 at the Hochschule where I teach. Perhaps yours are smaller or the same or larger. But in that context, it's not always possible for the teacher to be constantly giving personalized feedback to learners based on patterns which are recurring in their language production. So one thing we can do to get around that issue, which should hopefully also make our learners better language learners generally, is to encourage peer and self-evaluation. Okay, so we can ensure that learners, we can do whatever we can, as much as we can, to ensure that learners feel comfortable correcting each other or evaluating, giving feedback to each other. It doesn't necessarily only have to be correcting. Okay. Sometimes learners will say, oh, but I can't give feedback to my partner, I can't give feedback to the rest of my group because my English isn't perfect. Okay. We have to do what we can to break down that perception and say, it doesn't matter if your English is perfect or not, you can still, with your level of English that you have, say A2, B1, up to B2 or higher or whatever, even though your English is not perfect, you are still able to listen to a presentation, for example, and decide whether you have got the message that the person presenting wanted to communicate, or you're still able to read a text of whatever kind and decide if the person has correctly communicated. Correctly is perhaps not the best choice of words here. Successfully, rather, communicated the information they wanted to communicate. Okay, so we need to say to learners, yeah, I mean, I'm the teacher. Of course, I have more language knowledge than you. Perhaps we don't want to put it exactly in those terms, but that's the reality. But you can also evaluate each other, and you may also find that learners are more prepared to listen to feedback from each other than feedback from you, perhaps. So it's a kind of win-win situation. We can encourage learners to look for patterns in each other's language and use that as the basis for feedback. Of course, self-evaluation is also important to encourage learners to identify patterns in the English that they produce themselves and to feed that back to you one way or another so you can be aware of it. Okay. And then it's all very well being aware of it. It's great to get all of this feedback to identify your patterns, but then you need to translate that feedback into activities in the classroom. Okay. So this may mean building in activities to practice a particular skill, a particular vocabulary area, or maybe just if one of your students' needs is that they need more confidence when speaking, just putting in more speaking activities, for example. If they need to feel more confident writing, put in more writing activities. We need to make sure that we don't just keep this feedback and think, oh, great, I've done a great job because I've obtained all of this feedback. It then has to be translated into activities. For example, going back to the example I mentioned before from yesterday, with the group that were having problems with prepositions, I translated that into a short little activity / game where I took some blank pieces of paper that I had in my folder. I wrote alternately on them at, in, and on. So one piece of paper with at, one with in, one with on. I gave each student a piece of paper with one of the words on, and I said July, 24th of September, 10 o'clock, etc. And if the word that I said came after or comes after the preposition that they have on the paper, they had to raise their paper. So it's just a very quick little, okay, let's just practice this. Okay, let's just get you thinking what is actually the right way of doing this. All right. And then we went on. I showed them some ways in which they can remember this for future. For example, if I just write it, I'll just quickly write in the chat. In the morning, I say, okay, in the morning. Morning contains the word in. So that's how you can remember that it's in the morning and not at or on the morning. Okay. So we need to translate our feedback into activities and then find ways in which we can make the learning moments, if you like, from those activities memorable for the students. Okay, but finally, pathways. I like the word pathways. The pathway which I am being given in the Hochschule where I teach is, here's your syllabus, there you go, start at Unit 1, work through to Unit 9. This is over 2 semesters, by the way. That is the pathway that my coordinator, my institution, has decided that I should be following. My learners should be following. But is this necessarily going to be the right pathway for every learner? No, definitely not. Should we treat our syllabus or our course materials as the Holy Grail? No, we definitely should not, because they are not. The only Holy Grail, if you like, in our classroom is our learners' needs. Our learners and their needs are the things we should be giving the most reverence and respect to, not to a document. Okay, so what does this mean in reality? It means, at times, not being afraid to skip sections of your course materials or your syllabus where appropriate, because you know that your learners have already mastered it, they don't need it, or you know that it's just not going to help your learners. Okay, perhaps if I give you an example, in the course materials that I have to work with, there are a lot of articles taken from the Financial Times, which on the surface looks like a great thing to be including in a business English course. Financial Times, business English, don't the two go together? I mean, we have Market Leader directly incorporates Financial Times articles, doesn't it? But those Financial Times articles are just at too high a level for my learners. They're C1, therefore C1, C2 learners, and my learners are B1, B2. So if I ask them to read those articles, they're just going to get stressed and worried that their English isn't very good. They're going to lose confidence. It's just not going to be a helpful experience for them. Okay, so I would skip that that part of my course materials, and I would give them other materials to read which are appropriate for their level. Perhaps some published material, or perhaps a slightly simplified version of the article which I've created. Okay. So I think it's important not to be afraid to skip if it's appropriate, if it's going to help your learners to fulfill their needs. And kind of on the opposite side, we have supplementing. Okay, I find that I have to supplement my materials quite a lot if I'm really going to help my learners succeed and meet their needs. For example, some learners that I teach have to write an essay at the end of the semester, and they don't know how to structure an essay. But in their exam, about 20% of the points that they're given for their essay will be for its structure. Okay, so if they don't know how to structure an essay, they're not going to score well on 20% of the marking criteria. But in my course materials, there isn't anything on how to structure an essay. Okay, but clearly this is a need. Going back to production, I've seen the essays that the students produce at the start of the semester. It's clear, there's a clear pattern that they don't know how to structure the essay. Okay, but there are no materials in my course materials on structuring an essay, so I'm going to supplement that. Okay, either with materials that I've created or materials that I've found elsewhere. Don't be afraid to supplement. Okay, and connected with supplementing is what you could call deepening. Okay, sounds a little bit scary, but perhaps. But what I mean by deepening, well, it could be different things. It could be deepening knowledge, understanding of a particular area, which is not included in your syllabus. Or it could be deepening in the sense of getting more practice, giving more opportunities for practice, doing more practice. Speaking, writing, or whatever, doesn't really matter. Listening, reading, whatever. Just giving students more practice, if that's what they need. Okay, so I guess, yeah, I wanted to hear your reactions, thoughts, or questions. Perhaps we'll be able to do this via email. This is my email address. So if you would like, I don't know, perhaps you'd like a copy of my slides where you can see the beautiful flowchart that you weren't able to see just now, or perhaps you'd like to ask me a question about something I've just said, or you'd like to see some examples, some specific examples of the things that I've talked about, specific examples of how I do feedback, or worksheets that I've created, or whatever. Feel free to send me an email. I suppose the thing that I would like you to take away from this session is don't assume that you know what your learners need. Engage in communication with them about what they need, and then identify patterns which you can use to build activities on. And don't feel like your syllabus or your course materials, whatever it is some kind of holy grail, and that basically you are not good enough to supplement or skip or deepen it. Because I'm sure that you are, or you will be, if you listen to your learners' needs. So don't feel that don't feel like the materials that you're working with know about your students' needs than you do. There's a very good chance they will not. Okay? Don't forget to tune in as much as you can, whenever you can. Okay, so as they say, that brings me to the end of my little presentation today. I hope you found this helpful. And hopefully look forward to hearing from you if you choose to send me an email.